If you have ever visited or seen pictures of Egypt, then you must be amazed by how magnificent it is. The country is home to many of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, including the Great Pyramid of Giza, the only surviving ancient wonder of the world. It's no surprise that people from all over the world go there to see it for themselves. But it doesn't just have famous pyramids. It also has other important historical places, like temples, tombs, and museums. Many of these tell us about ancient Egyptian life and culture. But what was everyday life like in ancient Egypt? The first thing you should know is that ancient Egypt lasted for more than 3,000 years. And during this time, many different civilizations rose and fell around it. Even so, the country had many of the same features throughout history. This is why we can say with certainty that everyone who lived in ancient Egypt shared some common traits. So let's look at 5 secrets of the daily life of ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egypt was an absolute monarchy. The pharaoh was considered both the head of the government and the leader of religion. He owned all the land, and everyone else had to pay him rent to live on it. Even the clergy, who were supposed to be independent, had to answer to the pharaoh. Kings often meddled in religious matters, sometimes to the point of being considered tyrannical. Akhenaten, who ruled from 1353 to 1336 BC, is the best example of this. He tried to turn the many gods of Egypt into one god, Aten, but when he died, the old ways came back, and his successors did everything they could to erase his memory. But not all pharaohs were like Akhenaten. Some of them, like Ramesses II, ruled for a very long time and were very successful. He was the second longest ruling pharaoh after the first king of the 18th dynasty, who was also the most famous. Ancient Egypt was run by a group of officials called nomarchs, who were put in charge of keeping order. They were in charge of collecting taxes, building projects, and making sure the borders were safe. They also had to make sure the pharaoh's interests were looked after. It was a hard job because ancient Egypt was huge, so the nomarchs couldn't keep an eye on everything that was going on. When there was a problem, they sent a message to the capital city Thebes, where the pharaoh lived, to get help. One of the most important jobs in ancient Egypt was being a scribe. Even though scribes didn't have as much power as nomarchs, they were just as important. This was because they knew how to read and write hieroglyphics, which was the way knowledge and information were shared in ancient Egypt. Almost all official documents, including those related to the economy, were written in this difficult language. Because there weren't enough paper and pens, scribes wrote on pieces of papyrus, which are like thin sheets made from the papyrus plant. They used a reed pen to write in black ink made from a special kind of plant. They also used red ink made from a special kind of plant. Most of the writing was done on papyrus, but important documents were written on stone tablets. The scribes weren't just writers. They also kept records, did most of the math, and made sure taxes were paid on time. To be a scribe, you had to go through years of training and be very good at math. This was because the Egyptians used a complicated system of arithmetic, geometry, and algebra to do their work. If you were a scribe, you could move up to become a judge, treasurer, or even an official in charge of building projects. Being a scribe was a prestigious job. The scribes were highly respected because they were well educated. People thought that to be a scribe, you had to be smart and talented, and because they were needed for almost everything the government did, scribes had a lot of power. The Egyptians kept slaves. Slavery in ancient Egypt was very different from slavery in other parts of the world. Slaves in ancient Egypt weren't usually taken by force. Instead, they were bought and sold openly in the slave markets. Most of the time, slaves in ancient Egypt were foreigners who had been captured in wars or during raids. They came from Nubia, Syria, and other nearby countries. In ancient Egypt, slaves were mostly seen as a sign of wealth and luxury, rather than a way to make the economy run. Rich people often bought slaves to work as domestic servants, gardeners, personal attendants, and teachers for their children. Since owning slaves was a sign of wealth, poor people couldn't afford to buy slaves. The next secret is about ancient Egyptian food. What an Egyptian ate depended on how rich or poor they were. The main food for both rich and poor was bread, which was made from wheat. It was cheap and easy to store, so it was the perfect food for a busy and hot country like Egypt. The Egyptians also liked beer, which they drank instead of water because it wasn't as likely to make them sick. They made beer from barley, which was another grain that grew well in the area. Then there was meat, which only the rich could afford. They got meat from cows, sheep and pigs that were raised on farms. Fish was another source of protein that was popular in ancient Egypt. Since the Nile River was full of fish, most people ate fish at least once a week. Fruit and vegetables were a big part of the diet in ancient Egypt. The area around the Nile River was very fertile, so there was a wide variety of fruits and vegetables to choose from. Some of the most popular fruits were figs, dates, pomegranates and grapes. Vegetables like onions, garlic and leeks were also very popular, but not everyone could eat whatever they wanted. Only the wealthy could eat the best fruits and vegetables because the farmers who grew them sold them to the highest bidder. This meant that poorer people had to eat less tasty and less healthy foods. Everyone ate with their hands, but richer people had silver and gold plates and bowls, while poorer people had to make do with what they had. In the end, ancient Egypt was a complicated society with a rigid social structure. Even though there were problems, ancient Egypt lasted for a very long time and left behind a legacy that has affected the world in many ways. Hope you found this video interesting. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to watch more videos. See you next time.